Maybe let's do our sit reps.
Sure.
I don't know if you've been checking your email. I was in the middle of sending out feedback when things got very, very, very slow. So if you haven't gotten yours yet, don't worry. It's coming. Anybody want to go first? I know that we're not all here. I think Crystal just messaged that she can't make it. Ashley had already emailed me that she's on an airplane, and so we'll just get started. Should I pick names? I'm going to pick names. Greta, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going good. I'm working on my edit letter. I had like a lot of thoughts from all my like different notes and kind of mind map and the book map, which I really am enjoying using. I tend to summarize what I'm reading, like when I'm giving a critique, but this is like a more structured way to do it, and I'm finding it really helpful.
Great.
But the thing I think I'm finding challenging is to like compartmentalize my feedback, because so many of the issues seem to feed into each other.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been kind of wrestling with in the draft of the edit letter that I'm working on.
Amazing to me that you're already drafting. I think that's great. Some people actually don't get feedback because they don't get their letter even in rough shape.
Well, I know that it takes me a long time to do it.
Yeah.
Because I've done it for a few friends, so I was like, I've got to get started on it.
Yeah. They're not a super easy form to write in. But that said, it doesn't have to be good.
That's a relief.
It could be super rough. Yeah. So
great.
But that's great. Thank you. I'm just gonna still. Oh, my gracious! I might as well just close out of this, but I'm not going to. Maggie.
Yes, me. I'm obsessed with the book maps. I actually just made one for my friend's book that I just edited. And I sent it to her yesterday, and she was like, "What is this? I love it."
Yes.
I was just really jazzed about it. But I was getting like, well, first of all, I just feel like Destination Wedding was not my brand, and it made me very frustrated in general.
Yeah.
But as I was making the book map for it, I was seeing like 10,000 things where I was like, how did I miss this? And like there's certain stuff where I'm like, oh, I left feedback like in the markup, and I'm like, wait, it's just really confusingly worded in the manuscript, and like so it just made like things become a little bit more clear. But I just appreciate like how it just made like 10,000 more things pop out of me, but then that also annoyed me.
Yeah. They're kind of incredible.
It's very cool. Like the one I did for my friend's book, it was just kind of wild. She was like, I didn't realize I did like any of these like patterns and things that she saw in the book map. So that was really cool. And then as far as the editorial letter goes, mine's just like a really chaotic mess of like all my thoughts right now that I need to like organize and make coherent.
Perfect.
And sound nicer. So.
Yeah. I'm very impressed with you guys are killing it on the preparedness front.
I'm here to break that trend. I'm running behind. But
that's good. That makes, that's normal.
Gonna do it this week though before I start the editorial letter. So it's gonna be a busy week between now and when the letters are due, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad to hear that Greta and Maggie had such sort of positive experiences with the book map, so that makes me look forward to actually doing it this week.
Yeah. How's it going otherwise, Catherine? You
good?
Trucking along?
Chugging along.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Let me try this screen sharing again. Let me give it another try. Oh my gosh. You know what I could try?
I don't know if we're allowed to advertise for other groups, but I saw that the Editorial Freelancers Association has a class this fall on editing romance. And so I know, Maggie, you said this is not your normal cup of tea. It's not mine either. I don't read romance at all. Now that this really
I'll read fantasy romance here and there. But that's very different than like contemporary romance.
Yeah. I just thought I'd throw that out there. So I might take that since it's not something I have any comfort with from like my personal reading. It's good to.
That's a really good point, because like I have a lot of people that I read for that write fantasy, and some of them do like crossover into romance, and that was something I felt like a little bit less confident giving feedback on. So
that was definitely like my known weak area genre wise. So
romantic is a good time, and I find those kind of easy to like edit once you get used to them.
Yeah.
because I
That's
don't know.
encouraging.
Yeah, like fantasy itself, I find way harder to edit. Like if it's just fantasy, but fantasy romance, I feel like it's a little bit easier because romance has a lot of certain qualities and like traits that like are, I think, just make them less complicated.
Yeah, like parts of the structure or pattern to look for.
Yeah, it's a lot like less like complicated. Like there aren't like super intense magic systems usually, so it's more like
Yeah.
more central around the romance, less around like the magic and fantasy. So
This week we're doing editorial letters, which in a way is where it all comes together. And that is the most nerve-wracking, but also interesting part of an entire developmental edit for me.
how are you doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for asking. Yeah, things are, I really love reading other people's manuscript markup. Oh, there we go. I just find everybody's tone can be completely different, and there is quite a bit of crossover on what is, some of the bigger issues. But it's amazing too that some people will like a particular thing that somebody else will say, this can go completely, it's not adding anything. So I always find that exciting because it reminds me that fit is key. If you if you have the wrong editor, like it'll be a completely different book if it's edited by two different people with different sensibilities and tastes, and the writer takes the editor's suggestions. So that's why I think fit is so key, because then if you have a suggestion that the writer doesn't want to take up, then they at least trust you because the fit's right, and they know that you are familiar with, if it's a genre fit, they'll know that you're familiar with their genre. So not everybody I do have this kind of weird graph that I don't even send because it's just too anal in the feedback. I did already send a graph and a table, but for those who got theirs already, but the one I don't send has a kind of a rubric, like a little, table about whether the different areas of a developmental edit and whether there was commentary on that particular area. So was there any commentary on genre? No, yes, it doesn't matter if there is or not. It's just something I like to notice, because I think the more experience I got as a developmental editor, the more I was able to comment. Sorry, looking at my task manager, not responding. The more I was able to comment on everything, on the whole spectrum, even if you don't need to have those types of comments on the manuscript because you're going to have them in the letter. If you drop dead and all the writer ever gets is your manuscript, it's kind of nice that you have all kinds of stuff on there. So that's my that's why I like seeing everybody's manuscript markup. And if you're interested, I can send you how many, whether you hit like all the different things.
Yeah, I would actually love that.
No, I like
ask if you could.
Not
Yeah.
technical at all. I love that.
I should just put them in the letter. I mean, the thing is, because I read all the comments, but I might miss something. If somebody has a sentence on genre at the end of a really long comment, I might not see it. So I just don't want any like pushback on if I miss something. So that's why I don't put all those tables in. But honestly, that's just chicken. I'll do it because I think it's interesting myself, and yeah, could be useful. Okay, let's just keep going. Because actually you don't need to see the slide for me to tell you what happened, even though you already know what happened last week and the other weeks. So week 1, we looked at the industry, the course, reading sensibility. Week 2, we looked at the project and the developmental scope of work and stages and different examples. So now you're at the point where you've done the manuscript markup, you've done the book map. So of those products, the 3 products, you've done 2 out of the 3. And the only one left is the editorial letter. And if it wasn't an artificial situation, you'd have the call with the writer as well. So week 4 was all about the different perspective that a book map gives you, and how it can help you analyze things like, the cause and effect chain, plot, even just what's in scenes. That second skim read, as Maggie was saying, makes all the difference to me. This week, we're going to do big picture craft elements first, which are concept, kind of tied in with premise, concept premise. What's the big idea behind the book? It doesn't have to be a big idea. It can be a small domestic drama, but there's still going to be a way that the writer can describe it to people in publishing, or to people in the, on the back of the book, or in the case of the internet, on the Amazon description, that they will know if they want to read it or not. So we're going to look at those things, and also theme. Apparently Office has a new look, and I'm supposed to be excited about that right now. Yes, with also theme, which is interesting to me, because I resisted looking at theme as a writer. I just thought, what's the point? I don't want to, if I could say the theme, I wouldn't have to write a novel about it. I would just talk about the theme. But now I like it. I worked with an editor myself, and now I actually like theme. So I'll explain what I mean by theme and how it can help you understand, or how it can help you help the writer understand what they can let go of sometimes. Okay, I got it open, and we're going to do this thing. We're actually going to do it. We are doing it.
I believe.
Yeah, we need all of the we need like the manifestation, belief, energy, everything you've got. I'm afraid. I'm very afraid if I click share, but you know what? I'm going to do it. Is it showing? Can you see my screen? It's showing. I'm not going to go too fast on that. I'm not going to hurry it. Okay. So tonight, big picture craft elements. I'm going to explain in the second lesson, explain my views on the editorial letter. I had never seen one when I started editing for money. I made it up. I had no idea what they looked like, except that one from, I think I mentioned I got one from Doubleday. I didn't know it was an editorial letter. It was like a 2-page fax. That's the only one I'd seen, and it didn't occur to me until I've been editing for a few years that that was actually supposed to be an editorial letter. So I'll explain what I think they do for the writer and why I do them the way I do. And also, I put in the packet one of mine, just like the general flow of mine because of the confidentiality issues, and also one I found on the web, which is called a reading report or something like that, but it's a 19-page letter that does exactly what an editorial letter is supposed to do. It might be 17 pages. It's no longer available, so I just saw it and grabbed it at the right time. Okay, and the final lesson is kind of a step-by-step for writing an editorial letter. That's exactly what it is, in fact. If you do a lot of writing at work, you probably already have your own method for getting stuff written. I actually find that lawyers, people who work in the legal field, which I think Catherine's a lawyer, they already do some writing, like the practice of writing. I think it must get taught in law school. I'm just spitballing here, but it's similar. It's like it's got kind of a similar flow to some people I've talked to about it. So that's what the final lesson is. And then you can take the way I do them off into your post-course life and do them however it works for you. Because I do them a kind of a particular way that not every person in this course has liked. And so I'm totally fine with you just doing it the way you want to do it, and I'll give you feedback on that way. You know, my feedback is not like, is it done the way I do it? It's more like, is it good for the writer? Does it do what the writer is paying to have done, theoretically, even though they're not paying? Okay. Back to the stages. We have done a little bit of everything. Understood the novella to the degree that we can, liked it or not, would have read it or not, diagnosed some of its issues. I can see that from your manuscript commentary already. Considered context, identified some solutions, and now we're integrating all of that thinking and putting it in a letter, which is the first thing the writer reads on delivery of the edit. I ask them to read that first. And so this phase of the edit, it can be a little, you know, kind of, I don't know, not stressful, but a little bit, there can be a sense of impending doom if it's the letter's due tomorrow and you haven't started it, you know, like a sense, I get a little like, if I'm behind on a thing, but it's just kind of the effort of integrating information and synthesizing it and making it into something somebody else can read and understand fairly easily that makes sense to them, so that they are in a way convinced by your thoughts. You don't need them to take all your suggestions. They don't even have to like them or feel they're valid. But I feel like there's something about the letter that makes it almost seem inevitable that your thinking is going to help them, because, and this, I'm going by what I've seen of your manuscript comments, it is going to help them. It'll make it a better book if they take your suggestions. And, you know, so there's a way to phrase them where they know that it's totally up to them how they do things. They don't have to take everything. But I do feel that there's a certain element of, I don't want to say persuasion or even convincing, I think logic, you know, a certain element of logic in the editorial letters that will make it easy for the writer to go, okay, I trust this person and I'm going to try this out. Here we are at the craft elements. You know how I've been using train pictures? Well, this is the craft elements we're looking at tonight are kind of like zooming out from the train and looking at the tracks. Where is the train going? Does it actually, do the tracks begin and end somewhere that matters? And that's what looking at concept, premise, theme, and I think that's it. Will do. So this is the map of the Trans-Siberian Express, which is my favorite train journey of all time so far. I went from Beijing to Moscow in, oh God, a while ago, and it was winter and it was freezing, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happens on that train. If you ever get a chance to take it, I would do it. So I put that, you know, it's just a way of saying as far out as you can zoom at this stage of the edit is good for the writer. And these are the elements, craft elements: concept, premise, theme, and stakes. So I'm teaching these almost opposite of how a book on writing might teach them, or a writing course, because writing courses, I don't know if they start with, you know, how to write a sentence. They often start with what's your story idea, and then how do you think you're going to tell that. But this makes sense that we're looking at them in reverse order, because we're not writing the novels. We're reverse engineering them and figuring out how to make them better. So we have to start by reading what the person wrote. We can't start with these big picture things like concept or theme, because then we're just imposing our own ideas on their work without having really understood it first. And we get to these big picture overviews through reading and doing the book map. It's the landscape. The novel is the landscape that teaches us how to read it, what to notice, and what to reflect on. Concept is the germ of the idea for the novel. So each of these has a slide. Premise, or you know, log line, elevator pitch. It's like the next layer down from concept. It's more detailed. It's got character names. Usually situations are described more thoroughly. Concept can be one sentence or maybe two at the max. Premise is usually, you know, 3 or 4 or 5. theme, or the thematic underpinnings is sometimes what I call it, because I don't like to say theme in the application to novels for some reason. Theme is a little bit amorphous, but I'm going to do my best to explain it in the way that makes the most sense to me, that I found the most helpful for my fiction writing. So you can help your clients apply it to their fiction writing. And finally, there's stakes, which we'll just kind of, drive by, look at. Those are about the who cares aspect of the story. Because since all fiction is optional, it's not, it doesn't matter. Like, none of it's important. The stakes aren't real. So they have to be convincing. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to make them convincing, or how to notice when they're not convincing. So these are all about as developmental as you can get. They're not about the execution of the actual writing. They're not about the dynamics of individual scenes. They're not even about the cause and effect chain or the plot. Although, of course, everything is related. But they're about whether the journey a particular novel takes the reader on is worth the ticket price. And that's not just the cost of the book, because we have libraries, but it's also the reader's time and attention and involvement. The difference between fiction and nonfiction, or can be a difference, is that the reader isn't just looking for information. They're also invested and involved. They're looking for an experience. So, and I also just want to say, not everybody has the same exact definitions for these elements. So if you read other stuff and they say, oh, concept is actually this, and it doesn't agree with this, that's okay. Still think this will stand you in good stead. And you probably already know a lot of this. So the concept, central idea behind the story. Sometimes the concept all by itself is enough to be interesting. And that's when they're called high concept. Snakes on a plane, Not that doesn't mean you'd want to read it, but you don't need to know any more to know if you'd want to read it. Hunger Games is high concept because you don't need to know who the protagonist is. You could say the concept for Hunger Games might be it's about a world where young people are sent to fight to the death for the amusement of the corrupt, to earn benefits for their district that can save their lives and the lives of those they love. So that might be the concept, and it's high concept because you don't need the protagonist's name. You don't need to know how old she is or what her specific situation is. Theme, concept can be about the story world, the character, or the situation. So Hunger Games is kind of about the story world. I'm using that as an example most of you will have heard of. There's other, for example, character or situation might be a concept from the real world, like there's a couple getting divorced. They're no longer in love. That is, I don't know if anybody's a Pat Barker fan here. She wrote the Ghost Road trilogy, which is historical fiction set in just after the First World War. And she also wrote this novel called Border Crossing. And one of the main plot threads is a divorce. And the other one is this young man who just got out of juvie. He had killed somebody when he was a kid. And the protagonist is trying to get a sense of whether he's still dangerous or if he's been rehabilitated, like what the truth was behind that incident when he was young. Anyway, so if you're thinking about a divorce, Border Crossing is not high concept in that way, but Gone Girl, if you've ever heard of that one, that's a high concept divorce story. The wife fakes her own death and fabricates incriminating evidence that frames her husband for murder. It's very easy to sell. That's why it's popular in publishing. It's a lot easier to talk about. Comps can be readily brought to mind, comparative titles, and people in traditional publishing really care about that stuff. Okay, premise. Oh, I should back up and just say I don't usually tinker with concept in an edit. because it's the writer's job. But if you can get a handle on what the concept is and whether it could be improved or made more compelling, maybe by bringing something that's already in the novel to the fore, then it's good to bring it up. So it's just something to keep in mind. I don't know that destination weddings concept is going to help the writer. Sometimes I mean, it could help, and I would encourage the writer to write the premise out at the very least, which we'll go into shortly. But the thing about books that manuscripts that need a fair amount of help just on the level of characterization, arc, and plot, tinkering with the concept, it can help, but it's not going to fix the book. There's other issues that need to be fixed before you can even understand what the concept of the book is, actually, sometimes. So, I mean, you could apply, actually, now that I think about stranger in a strange land, that could be a concept for destination wedding, but it would kind of be pointless to try and lay that on top of the events already in there, because until we know what the book is really trying to do, we can't say, oh, maybe it would be cool if Joe is, is experiencing something like big alienation from the world at large, and then has to go to this wedding and all hell breaks loose. Two alienated people falling in love. Yeah. Huh? Okay, premise. It's the concept in more detail. Still only in a few sentences. Short description of the story that includes the character, the scenario, and the main conflict. And again, it's useful, especially for the writer, to try and write their premise out. When I work with people on a developmental edit, if their story is sort of an amorphous thing and they know what they want, but they haven't quite conveyed it, then I will ask them to write out 5 versions of the premise. Just do a free write, set the timer for 10 minutes, write it once, do it again, do it 5 times, and send them to me. And they will get 5 different ways of looking at the novel. And then when we meet, we'll talk about which one makes sense as a lens to focus the revision through, basically. So it depends on the writer. Sometimes it's not necessary, but sometimes it's really helpful. Okay, another way to think about is character, problem, and stakes. In the Cipher book, the premise is defined as what the story is about in a few simple sentences. Although the examples in Sarah Cipher's book are longer than a few sentences, they're a good paragraph, I think. But who it's about, what their problem is, and what they need to do to fix it, and what will happen if they fail. It answers the question, why is this an interesting story? So again, you don't have to come up with the premise. The writer does that. And you might not even see their premise if their story already works. Sometimes they'll send it in their intro. If they've been working with, say, a book coach or something, they'll already have written out the premise, and they'll send it in their email or put it on your contact form on your website saying, this is what my book's about. I usually do a free, feedback on their query letter if they're pitching publishers, or on their back cover description if they're self-publishing. And so that's when I can help them with their premise. But if you find issues, even if you haven't seen their book, haven't seen their premise, if you find issues with the book that are kind of amorphous, helping them think about the premise will be useful. Sometimes literary fiction, the premise is hard to find because it's so well written that it's almost like the story is secondary, and that can be okay, but it still is better if the story is equally privileged as the prose. And so when I'm editing, I just see if the premise is findable. If I'm thinking about the novel after I've read it and after I've done a book map, could I write a 5-sentence description of what it's about? I don't try because it's hard. But if you're new to editing, you could give it a try. It's really great practice. Or if you do it for your own stuff. If the manuscript's premise, like if I can write a quick, hatchet job of a 5-sentence premise, and it's weak or boring, or it's been done a million times, then I might think about the novel and whether there's ways to raise the interest level of the novel, which would be reflected in their premise. Agents really, especially for traditional publishing, agents have to love a book to offer representation. They have to be blown away. So if you do end up working with writers who want to publish traditionally, the more you know about, how to find a premise, how to come up with an angle on the material if a premise isn't already inherent in it, that the more helpful you can be to those writers. But it's also incredibly useful for self-publishers who basically want the same thing. They want to be able to make their book sound super interesting. It doesn't have to be hooky or commercial, just to be clear. It's great if it is, but that's not the only reason writers write books. Sometimes they just want to tell a particular story. So in a previous cohort, I'll try and find the premise somebody took a stab at writing a premise for Destination Wedding. And I had this personal experience where I wrote a novel. I wrote like 7 drafts, and then it was ready. I felt it was ready to pitch. So I started writing the query letter. I wrote 7 drafts of the novel, and then I started writing the premise as part of the query letter. And the premise was better than the book. So like I had to make the premise better, I had changed a couple things that happened. And so when I realized the premise was stronger than the actual novel, I had to go back into the novel and try and make it work. I had to make it fit the premise, because there was no way I was going to send out a novel that I could find issues with, and that was a nightmare revision, because it meant like I had to conflate a character, 2 characters into one. I changed plot events, it was very, very, very messy. So, okay, theme. It has been defined as the unifying idea that permeates the story. If I have a stroke because of PowerPoint, just talk amongst yourselves for the next little while. Woo! Because I just might. Okay, theme. Unifying idea that permeates the story. I mentioned I kind of resisted theme. It just died on me. Oh, I feel like I should sing a song now, just to keep you on top of things. I'm just going to open the PDF as a backup, and we'll continue with theme. And I really apologize. This is my worst nightmare. If it makes you feel any better, it's never happened before. Yeah, so I worked with there was this Editorial Freelancers Association has a listserv, where you can sign up for emails if you're a member. And I got the digest version. And in one of them, back when I was still reading them, now I kind of delete because I'm subscribed to so many Substacks. I don't have time for the EFA stuff, but it was incredibly useful early on. And one of the things that I struck my eye was that there was this publishing program at Emerson College in Boston, and it was a master's program in publishing, and they were looking for fiction manuscripts, and I had one. It was the one that I had started over on. I did start over that on the 4th draft, but that's not the thing I was telling you. It's the one I had written the premise of and then had to revise. And I had actually gotten an agent with that novel. She had shopped it around to imprints of the big 5. It got kind of high up it got like where they took 2 months to get back to me at New American Library because they'd had to take it to the editorial board and do a marketing analysis and stuff. And then they said no. So it was in pretty good shape, but it wasn't sellable. And so I had it ready. It was under the bed, and it was metaphorically speaking. And I sent it to Emerson, and they matched me up with a master's student who was doing fiction editing, and she forced me into writing what she called a thematic statement in order to make my novel better. And I resisted like hell. I asked her, and I'm a very law-abiding person, but I was just like, I don't like this assignment. I don't want to do it. So I was like, can you give me, do you have any examples? And she gave me one that the prof, the guy who ran the program, had written, but it wasn't as I mentioned to her, it was a question. It wasn't a statement. I was like, what's it, can you tell me a statement? Anyway, she came up with one for the Great Gatsby, which I thought was very clever. And I'm going to read it because, because this was such a weird start to the class, it might be a good idea to read the script for the first 12 slides, because I went completely off it. Okay, so let's see if you can see this thematic statement. It's by the editor, Emma Holtrust. In The Great Gatsby, the American dream is shown to be an illusion that you can strive for, but never achieve. And you'd have to have read that book. I don't know if they still assign it in school. However, I like it because I like this example. It really helped me actually write one for my own novel. And also, when I thought about every character in The Great Gatsby, this could be applied to each character. And that's what makes it a thematic statement. It's more than just, oh, this is, Nick Carraway's story, or like the narrator, or it's more than Gatsby's story. So for example, it does apply to Gatsby and to Daisy. She's born into privilege, but she's very unhappy. And even to Nick Carraway, he came back from the war and he's a mess emotionally. He doesn't want to get involved with anybody, and he's just there to make money. But there's that scene. Well, I won't get into it. I was addicted to that novel for a brief period. I took it apart because I thought it was so well structured. But it also applies to Myrtle Wilson, who is the woman that Tom is having an affair with, Tom Buchanan, and to her husband, George, who's the mechanic who works on Tom Buchanan's car. In fact, it could even be applied to Tom Buchanan. He was born into privilege, but he's not a happy guy. And he's striving for, control over his wife and his life, but he's not really getting anywhere. Okay. So again, if you're the editor and not the writer, you might work on manuscripts where it's just suffering from a lack of meaning. You don't care. You don't care very much. And it's got more than just you're not interested in the characters. Sometimes I'll write a little section on theme in the editorial letter, and I'll just list the various threads. Like we did a little bit of that, and I noticed it in some of your comments. Things like, is it about Joe's sort of inability to take responsibility, or her need to have more confidence in herself? Theme can be related to character arc. It always is, actually, I think. So you don't have to do anything with it, but I would sometimes do that. I'll list the various types of threads: responsibility, love, blah, blah, and say which ones I think play out the strongest in the story. And then sometimes that will help the writer come up with a thematic statement. Because every novel, there's no answer, really, for a novel. It's an exploration of something, but it's not there. It doesn't lead to an answer. It's all about the exploration, what the novelist is doing. So if the novel lends itself to that type of discussion, and I think developing a thematic statement will help the writer, I'll bring it up. I'll bring it up in the letter. Sometimes I'll bring it up on the call. I don't always put stuff like that in letters. Stakes. Stakes are why the story matters to the reader. And that's about who cares, it's fiction. Because fiction is so optional, if the reader doesn't care, they'll just put the book down. Readers are ruthless. They're real world readers. I used to be one of those readers who it would take a lot for me to not finish a book. Once I started one, I felt obligated for some reason, but now I'm far more ruthless. And many readers are ruthless right at the beginning. I actually know somebody, I almost fell out of my chair when she told me this. She will get a book out in the library, or buy one, and she'll read the first page, and then she'll read the last page. And if she can't, if to her it's not obvious how they connect, she'll read the whole book. If it's obvious to her, if it feels like a cliche or, like it's just playing out the way she thought it would, she won't read the book. I just found that so astonishing. I was like, oh, us writers, do we have our work cut out for us with those kinds of shenanigans? All right. But so stakes don't have to be huge, though. Like thrillers have big stakes. Most writing craft books will say the protagonist must have something at stake. Or, sometimes they must want something, they must have a goal, or they must be wanting to stop something. This is the flip side of that. And it makes sense. Of course, it's good to have them want things, that drives the narrative, creates opportunities for conflict, builds tension, and keeps the reader interested. But there are some novels where characters don't seem to have anything at stake. Like I don't know if anybody has read Leaving Las Vegas or seen the movie. It's kind of an old movie, Nicolas Cage. Anyway, this guy's an alcoholic. He wants to die. He wants to drink himself to death. That's his goal. And, I found that novel very interesting. It's only 4 chapters, I think, but they're very long, and it's a short novel. So there's his point of view. And if, you could think if he doesn't care about himself, then why would the reader care? It's more than watching a train wreck of some guy drink himself to death. I really like the way he described things in that, the writer. But we care because there's another character in that novel. I forget her name, but she starts to care about this character, and she starts trying to help him she tries to help him look after himself, and she gets beat up, like she's a sex worker. She's got somebody after her. She's got this other tension, and she really cares about this person. So even if the protagonist, what seems to be the protagonist, doesn't have much at stake, it can still be a novel with high stakes, because I didn't want him to die because she loved him, and she didn't have a lot of joy in her life. I think this trick with stakes is connecting the reader to the character strongly enough that what matters to the character will also matter to the reader. So that's in that way, it's tied in with credibility, logic, characterization, the skill of the writer, and the depth of the reading experience. I think one of the reasons it's hard to care about Jo is not just that she's got some issues, but also that we don't get deep enough into why she's doing what she's doing and why she wants what she wants, or even know what she wants, really, because she goes to the wedding without it actually being clear what she's after in that experience. So I think it can really be helpful to think about stakes and to try and help the writer figure out if what's at stake, if the reader is aware of what's at stake for the characters, and make them, not make them, sort of introduce them to the idea that stakes are about our common humanity, aspect of our common humanity. So if we're a human being who loves to read, we're going to get involved in a novel where we are helped to understand and connect with the protagonist. Thank God we don't have to create the stakes. That's the writer's job. We just have to think about them and sometimes talk about them in a way that would help the writer understand, because it can be hard to see these really, really, really big picture things about your own novel unless somebody points them out to you. Lesson 1. Oh my God, it's the end. I'm so self-absorbed. This is just to say, craft never ends. It's a bottomless well of fascinating information. And I think it's full of discoveries. Lots of editors are not writers. Lots of editors are writers. It doesn't matter. It's full of discoveries that will up your game and the game of the writers you work with. And I like to work with writers who are hungry to learn, personally. I discovered it by accident. You will meet some writers who just want to be told their work is good. and they don't want to hear anything other than that. But I never ever work with writers like that. I have no idea how I avoid them, because I don't say anything like that on my website, like, prepare to learn or anything like that. I mean, the assumption is that if you're in there for an editorial experience, you're going to be taught, right? That's the whole point. But I think I just don't see the point in suggesting how to fix one novel without also giving some tools for writing the next one better too. So I see it as a kind of a bigger relationship than just the one book. If you don't feel like you know enough about craft, I would say all of you do who are sitting here with me. If you don't feel like you know enough about craft to be helpful at this point, you will soon. It's and I'm saying this for anybody whose stuff I haven't seen yet, because everybody whose manuscript markup I've seen knows enough. But you'll just set yourself a study program and work with novice writers to begin with, because you can help them right away. And then you'll know more than some editors who've been working for years. Like Crystal was saying, she never got to find out if her editor knew anything because there was only 4 comments, no editorial letter, and no meeting. So I have once in a while gotten a look at somebody's editorial letter because a client will share it with me. They'll have worked with an editor previously sometimes, and they'll say, can you read this and tell me what you think? And I never read it till after I've done my own edit, and then I'll take a look and I'll comment on it. And I'm surprised sometimes at how thin they are. They're not what I would consider a developmental edit. So, not everybody has to work the way I do, but I feel like if you're going to offer developmental editing, the feedback should be clear, it should be developmental, and it should be in line with what you're charging. So you're all in good shape from there. And I guess my point was, and I do have one, was that it's a lifelong pursuit, and sometimes the very best way to get a good handle on craft is just to read a lot. Did I put the break slide in? Oh my God, I did. Oh no, it's a question slide. I would have put the break slide in the PDF. I might have though. Any questions? Okay, let's see if there's a break slide in here. That would be weird. Oh my God. Well, isn't that funny? I never noticed that. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. I'll try and get my act together on the PowerPoint. Thank you for your kindness, everybody. So it's 4:24. See you at 4:29. Hi, Greta.
I'm here. I'm just eating a cracker.
Very specific. Okay. Everybody, fingers crossed. An editorial letter. What is it? It's the first deliverable that in my world. Why not just give them the manuscript with marginal comments and a 3-page note at the end with some tips on what to work on more? But that's not out of line, because there is no commonly held standard for what a developmental edit is. You could do that. And I actually do something like that when I swap manuscripts with other writers, except I make it a cover note because I want them to trust me before they read all the comments. And the way to build trust is to let them know you respect their work and are taking it seriously. You know, if your first comment is sort of negative or judgy or weird, not that it would be, but if it ever is, if they have read something else by you first, they go in there with a different attitude than if the first thing they read is not that great. However, I don't just do a 3-pager with paying clients or just send them the manuscript with comments unless I've worked with them before. I always write a letter or a cover memo, and I always ask them to read it first. And I think it's because novels are complicated enough and writers work hard enough on them that I don't want to give a bad experience just through thoughtlessness or laziness. I don't want, if I'm going to give tough feedback, which I do, I would like to give it in a way that prepares the writer so that they can receive it with an open mind. And the editorial letter is the primary vehicle for that feedback. It is more than a cover letter. It's more than a list of issues. I'm going to just pause for a minute and go back to the ridiculous scope of work. Analyze structure, suggest ways to improve, pacing, blah, blah. Address whether length and placement of world building information, a backstory. That depends really on the genre. Sometimes I don't have that quite as long. Identify and recommend whether to cut, expand, move, or reorganize scenes. Even in marginal comments, some of you made those types of suggestions, and it's great. Comment on genre expectations and category norms. Comment on recurring prose issues impacting publishability. Anyway, that's my scope of work. So it just is what I say I'm going to do. It doesn't say how I'm going to do it. I do it through active reading, making marginal comments, and the book map. And then the editorial letter packages up the work I've done and delivers it to the writer with some additional analysis. My letters don't go through each bullet point on this slide and speak directly to them, although they could, you could do it that way if you wanted to. But when I do the letter, I do ensure I address everything in the scope of work to a greater or lesser degree, either by writing about it or by saying, please see the book map for information on this, that, or the other. And the greater or lesser degree part has to do with whatever issues that manuscript has. So if it has no problems with backstory dumps or, stuff like that, then I don't make it I don't put it in the editorial letter. I'll have it in the, I might actually have structure as a strength or plot as a strength. And I'll just say, might have a sentence like, because you don't do a lot of backstory, pacing is good, things like that. So it makes the other two items make sense. And it prioritizes issues. I like it to identify strengths in the letter as well and give the writer actionable advice. So these are kind of blanket statements, which I usually try to avoid. But one of the class promises, in the sales page was that I would convey what not to do, as well as walking you through what to do. So this is what I try to do in my editorial letters. One is I reiterate the goals. So I actually say something simple like, the goal of this is to identify issues, suggest solutions, and help you gain a fresh perspective and framework for revision. It's in the packet, so you don't have to try and remember it or anything. Feel free to use it. I say what to expect along the lines of, along with this letter, I'm sending a book map and the manuscript itself, annotated with comments. Sometimes I'll give a short tour of the letter, saying, I'm going to start with what works, move on to what I think needs some work, and end with comments on the publishing landscape for this manuscript and revision suggestions, stuff like that. Then I establish my understanding of their manuscript by giving them an overview of its structure. I don't always write a synopsis. You'll see in the second, I hardly ever write a synopsis. I used to more often, but they're kind of time consuming. you'll see in the other editorial letter example that's in your packet, there's a 6-page synopsis that the editor wrote. And so you can, I feel that the book map in some ways replaces the synopsis. You don't really need to, but if I do write one, I try and keep it to 4 or 5 paragraphs and I write it from memory. Sometimes I'll have the book map next to me, like if I print it out, but I won't, I won't try and make it too accurate, because I think if there's a problem with, if I can't tell the story after having worked with it so closely, then it's probably a signal that there's, it's a little unclear. And so, if I've misunderstood what's going on, then that's good information for them to have. But as I say, I don't very often write a synopsis anymore. If you like them and you want to include them, then I would just add them to your scope of work and figure out when the best timing is for you to do it. It could be after the first read or after you do the book map or whatever. So after I established my knowledge of the manuscript, and that I just will say something like, Destination Wedding is a 30,000 romance in 11 chapters, protagonist. It's told third person or first person or whatever it is, from 2 points of view. It's very, very top level structural. Then I go into strengths, and I sound really rigid, but I don't do it rigidly. So I'm trying to identify big picture strengths, and I try and keep it to 2 to 4, because if you try and list everything, it just turns into a list. And by big picture, I mean related to the craft levels that we've gone through in this course. So plot, characterization, and so on. Then for weaknesses, I basically try and do the same. And Maggie, was it you who was saying, or Greta maybe, about, you're thinking about the editorial letter or doing some writing about it, is that it can be kind of a mishmash. It's hard to figure out how to structure it. My aim in looking at strengths and weaknesses is to apply some kind of external structure. Strengths is good, especially if you start with them, because the writer is going to be receptive when you start talking about weaknesses. And weaknesses, I try to line up the issues under an overarching category. So for example, there's some issues with plot in Destination Wedding that could be lined up under characterization, like because it's a character issue that Jo doesn't have much agency. She just sort of floats around. She doesn't try and get hold of Lisa to any real serious degree. She doesn't try and make her own luck or opportunity. Everything just comes at her. So you could line something like that under characterization, but it's a very amorphous until I'm finished kind of drafting the letter, and then I'll see ways to do it that make sense to me. I try to keep the weaknesses to 2 to 4 as well. It really depends on the novel. So you might think a particular scene is an issue because the pacing is awful, like it's dragging the novel's pacing down. I might put pacing in the first third as the overall issue, and then, have that underneath one of them. Like there's a couple of scenes here that you could think about cutting or making matter. And some genres, it's more important than others, but generally you do want the story engine to be strong, no matter what genre the writer is aiming for. So after strengths and weaknesses, as I'm going, and you'll see in the packet, I address the weaknesses, after I identify them. Like, so I don't go, here's 3 weaknesses, and then go, okay, now here's the 3 solutions. I do, here's what I think is weakness 1. Here are some ways to fix it. Weakness 2, some ways to address it. You can organize it however you want. I've done it all kinds of ways with the revision suggestions. I used to do a chapter by chapter revision thing. Chapter 1, consider this, this. And that was too detailed, I feel. Also a ton of work, because I'm writing a letter and then I'm doing another 10 or 15 page chapter by chapter revision guide. So I try not to do that anymore. I still have one client who got it when I was doing it, like got it that way. And I tried to get away without sending him the chapter by chapter. And he's like, I didn't not send it. I just kind of didn't include it in the scope of work. And he said, oh, I really like those chapter by chapters. They make it easy for me. Like, shoot. Dang. He's going to have to pass away before I can get rid of that one. But Or I could say no, right? Okay, so I used to throw everything at the editorial letter, and now I really understand better what to leave for the book map and the manuscript markup, what to have in the letter, and what to have let the writer figure out on their own. You don't have to solve every single problem. I just try to come up with suggestions. And editorial letters are a bit of an art in themselves. They're definitely a craft, I would say. So making useful suggestions, that can come in a number of ways, and you'll see how the other editor did it in the other example. Deploy your editorial voice. So I have a particular tone when I write. I got some of your voices in the comments, are very distinctive. And so that's, I would say, a plus. The writer wants to know who they're working with. And when you do any kind of writing for work, you have a particular voice that you write in, I think. It's got a certain tone, my editorial voice, and I use a different one for, like, I have a newsletter on writing and I write blogs on writing. I use it's more casual, my voice, for those things, but for the letters, I'm a little more, sometimes more formal. I don't waste any time, actually. Here's the don't launch right into issues. I think that can be, well, it's not necessary, it's not helpful. It doesn't let you establish your understanding of the book or the writer or fiction in general. So it can come across as unhelpful. Don't waffle and be vague. And by that, I mean, try and be clear about what you think the issue is. Even if you say, I'm not 100% right in all my opinions, what you're saying is, this is my response to your manuscript. Your experience as a reader is always valid. So they might not agree with how you felt or think you should have felt that way, but nobody can say you didn't have the reaction that you had. And so if, I'm clear about that. If character arc needs work, I say that it needs work. I say why I think that, like, was I, how did I feel as a reader because it needed work? And then I say what I would do to improve the issue. If you see more than one way to improve a particular issue, which you often will, I would just, you can just say that. There's a few ways we could approach this, or you could approach this. And sometimes I just offer to talk about it on the call, because until I know what they wanted to do, what they were aiming for, it's hard to give good advice without, getting too detailed. Don't leave them hanging. I would say for a manuscript evaluation, sometimes it's okay to not give them a whole bunch of suggestions about what they can do. It's a slightly different form. And I'm going to go into a comparison of the manuscript evaluation, the developmental edit. But I would say, don't just present them with the analysis and then say good luck with your novel. Give them steps they can do, even link to YouTube videos or stuff you've read that, I think I mentioned early on in this course, I have a PDF of different articles, like one on, the art of tension. I used to subscribe to Poets and Writers magazine, and they have some really good craft articles, and there's all kinds of craft books. So if I think they can explain it better than I can in the letter, I'll just say, I'm attaching a PDF for you. This is why I think you should read it. You don't have to solve their problems, but it is a good idea to give them a place to start and the tools to solve those problems themselves. Okay. And leaving them hanging can also refer to how you close the letter. I end mine with just support and encouragement and an offer to schedule the post-edit talk. Don't suggest a whole new book. I believe that among professional editors, that is pretty rare. It's more likely to happen with beta readers, or sometimes in writing groups, or when the novel I was telling you about was getting pitched. One of the acquisitions editors came back with this request for a revise and resubmit, asking that the point of view character be changed to the guy's 9-year-old son. And I was like, no. Not because I don't want to sell the book, but because I just don't think I can write that, like it's not really what I want to write. Anyway, yeah, so it's rare to suggest a whole new book, but and sometimes if you really if you really ask them to dig deep and work on their premise, it'll feel like a whole new book when they're done. But it's not you saying in the letter, you need a whole new book. It's more like, let's get to the book underneath the book, the one that's the readers are going to want to read. Don't scold or condescend. Well, you would think that's obvious. I have read some stuff, not condescending, and I'm not talking about anybody in any of these classes. Actually, it's been stuff I've read, reactions to my own stuff when I was a new writer, and people can get angry. Writing teachers can be cruel, and so I would never do that in an editorial letter. It's not professional. It can be hard though. Sometimes a manuscript is so full of plot holes and lapses in logic and credibility that I just can't believe the writer thought it through. I can't believe they didn't just put it in a drawer and then read it in a couple of months and see all those problems. But so it can be an effort sometimes not to lecture them, but I just don't do it. And you might find it more so if you work with a lot of novice writers, because they just don't know, about stuff. And so it'll be easier to get irritated, but I don't do it. And I think, the being straight, and the difference between being straight with somebody and having a tone when you're being straight with them, having a kind of a scolding tone is clear to all of us. It's not hard to find you're doing that. This is also why I like to let the letter sit overnight before I read it. Before I send it, because then I can read it over in the morning and take any tone issues away. I am pretty writer-centric as editors go, so you don't have to feel the way I do about the editorial letter. But I do feel that it is where you give the writer the experience you want them to have, despite how much work you're suggesting the manuscript needs. And I think about it, if I'm them, I want the truth. I want to know what the flaws are. I want some suggestions. I would be very disappointed with an editorial letter that failed to deliver that information with some clarity. I really want the flaws to be identified. And I got a beta read. I paid for a beta read on a previous manuscript I'd written that had been in the drawer for about 5 years. And it's enough in those for the reader just to ask questions that help me understand where the problems are. Like, well, why didn't he start looking for the guy? That kind of stuff. Let's go back to the goals. If the short-term goal of developmental editing is the best current book, the long-term goal is the maximum development of the writer's talent and independence. And that's why I tend to be a sort of teachy type editor. You don't have to be that person if that's not how you roll at all. If you do, it would mean just extrapolating beyond the particular book. So you wouldn't just say where the pacing issues are in this novel, but teach them about where pacing issues come from in general. Maybe referring them to books on scene dynamics or raising tension, stuff like that. I have a bunch of paragraphs on my computer that I used to use more. Right now, I work mostly with intermediate writers, and so they know the same. They already know this stuff. But when I was starting out, I worked with a lot of novice writers, and so I would have actual little boilerplate text that I would put it in the letter, and then I would relate it to their novel. So if you want to have, like a dramatic structure, that kind of stuff. And it saves you reinventing the wheel. And you don't have to teach writing skills. It's just fostering skill development in the writers you worked with, really. Sometimes the learning is from both sides too. You learn to speak the client's language. Okay, so how long do these babies take? I might spend longer than other editors do. I have no way of knowing this, but I think 5 to 9 hours is pretty average for a full-length novel. The last 2 letters I wrote, one was for a manuscript evaluation. I did something I don't like doing, which is write it the day it was due. And I started at 8:30, I think, in the morning. I already had a bullet list of what works, what needed work. I already knew quite a lot about how I felt. And I emailed it at 3:30. So that one took like 6 hours. And I got up to take a break, but I didn't stop working on it the whole time. Before that, I did a full-on developmental edit, and that one took about 10 hours because it was a long novel and it had a lot of things. So it used to take me, those hours are for everything that I'm going to describe in lesson 3. There's like a 7-step process I go through, or system, whatever you want to call it. I'm not writing for all of those hours. It's not just writing. It's thinking, it's looking at the book map. It's, going through my comments, it's spell checking, formatting, because sometimes your mind goes like, oh, and you just got to do something mindless, but it still needs to be done before you can deliver. It used to take me a lot longer because I didn't have a system and I didn't have a template. I knew how to write a letter. I actually knew how to analyze a novel as well because I went to school, but I didn't really know how to do either one of them quickly. And I at that point, I wasn't using strengths and weaknesses as an organizing principle. So I was going through every big picture aspect and saying something about it, whether it needed work or it didn't need work, which was a long way to do it. And that was just because I hadn't seen one. I wasn't really aware that actionable advice and analysis needed to meld more fluently. They weren't terrible letters, they had a lot of heart, but I think I do them better now. I'm more organized, streamlined. It always needs to be revised. So this time frame includes that as well. Sometimes it's a nip and a tuck, the revision, or sometimes it's major surgery, and that can take almost an hour. If I'm actually moving sections around, it's not any more than that because all I'm doing is moving stuff around and smoothing out transitions. The bulk of it has been written. So the revision process is something to consider. For this class, if you want to send in your letters filled with typos, no letterhead, it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to comment on the content. If you have time to spell check it, that would be great. But if you want to show me what your letterhead might look like, or if you already have some, I'd love to comment on it. I love stuff like that. So whatever you want to send is fine by me. As I had one person in the last cohort, she didn't have time to do a full letter. So what she did was just put the headings in and then did the what's works and what needs work, because that's the part, that matters the most in terms of whether you're hitting some of the good points. But also she just said, oh, under this section, I'd write about this, this, and this. But she didn't actually write it because she didn't have time. So that was fine. I thought that was a good way to do it too. Okay. What is the difference between a manuscript evaluation and a dev edit? Greta, I think you had that as a question. What are we? We must be psychic. They're both big picture with similarities first. They both, to me, identify strengths and weaknesses. Both of them give revision suggestions, just more detail for the developmental edit. To me, they both discuss the publishing landscape. And I say that if you can. When I started editing, I didn't know enough about it, so I didn't even have it in there. But it's good, especially for a manuscript evaluation. People want to know if you think their book. You can't tell anybody if their book is publishable or not. I don't mean that you're not allowed to. I mean, you really can't. Nobody knows. Even publishers don't know until they see it. So, but you can talk about obvious issues like it's twice the length of a middle grade novel should be, stuff like that, which is that too, publishability. Those are slightly different, actually. So by that, I mean, publishing landscape is, this, sometimes I'll know if a trope has been overdone. Like I personally think dystopian young adult fiction has reached its end, but it doesn't mean it won't come back. It's just that right now it has to have a good twist for that to be taken on. And sometimes they do have a good twist. The publishability, I do comment on whether I think it meets publishable standards, and that often has to do with prose. Sometimes, like if it's a mystery and it doesn't have, and the plot over relies on coincidence, then it's not about prose, it's about plot. But I'll comment on that. I'll say, well, here, if it's writing in this genre, this is what needs to be part of it, and your plot relies too much on coincidence for this to be publishable. Although a self-publisher can publish whatever they want, but readers do have certain expectations. So I do comment on that in both. Okay, for the purposes of this class, you can ignore publishability and publishing landscape unless you want to talk about it in the letter. Oh, here's the differences. I don't comment that much in a manuscript evaluation. Same, let's say it's 100,000 words. Manuscript evaluation, I'll maybe have, 300 comments. For developmental edit, I'll probably have way more than that, 500 or 600 for something long, sometimes even more. I used to comment tons. I geared back. Editorial letter is shorter for a manuscript evaluation. I still think mine are a bit longer than the norm, actually, for that. I've seen other editors' websites where they say for manuscript evaluation, you'll get a 5-page letter. Some of them aren't specific. And because it's shorter, it's less specific around solutions. I'll shoot out a couple of ideas for the issues, but I don't get very detailed. I don't do a lot of what ifing or anything like that. I do think, yeah, for the editorial letter in a developmental edit, 13 to 16 pages seems to be my norm. That's for a full-length novel. So don't feel you have to aim anywhere near that for this course letter. It can be as long as you want it to be. The developmental edit comes with a book map. And I do pay more attention to the revision approach because sometimes the order of how you do things can make a revision easier or harder. However, that's just me as a writer jumping in and going, well, I think it might be easier to approach it this way, but I also always say something like, every writer approaches things their own way. So this is just a suggestion. Developmental edit, I am more likely to send additional resources, like from my library of stuff. And I always throw in a query or blurb critique. Both of them, I always have a follow-up meeting. So you can see there's a much less intensive scope of work. Initially, when I offered both, they were not that different in the end because I didn't know how to gear back and make them different. I was just like throwing all of myself at every manuscript I worked on, but I've gotten a lot better. And by, I think it's good to stay in your lane, not just with levels of editing, like try not to do any line editing when you're doing a developmental edit, but also to make your manuscript evaluations and your developmental edits different. I remind myself sometimes that, they're paying X amount for this, and that was their decision. I'll just pitch both in my sample edit letter. So that was their decision. I need to stick with what they decided. If I give everybody the same stuff, which I used to do, then I burn out. So, question.
I do have a question about the meeting with the writer afterwards.
Yes.
When they've had a chance to kind of look through the feedback and process it and you meet with them, do you sit down with like a list of questions or anything? Or do you just kind of say like, how are you feeling? Like, what questions do you have? Do you let them kind of guide it?
Yeah, good question, because it depends on the writer. It completely depends. I don't have like a template or anything that I go through with writers. I always ask them how they're feeling. Yeah, they'll often send me ahead of time. I have one client who sends me, we've only worked on one book together, but we've worked on it twice. And each time he has sent me his revision of the book map with notes, 3 or 4 pages of questions. I don't know if I mentioned this guy, but it took, normally my calls are like in 60 to 90 minutes, usually 60, but sometimes if we're worked a lot of books, we'll start chatting and stuff. This guy was 4 hours. And I just said, no, let's do it. Like, cause he was like, well, he was defensive at first. And so he wanted to go through every single comment on the manuscript until he realized that these were really readerly reactions. They were not, worth arguing over. And then we got to the meat of it and he understood that I was basically on his side. There was no compulsion for him to do anything that I suggested, but that it was a really good opportunity to talk about the book. So he had a bunch of questions and we went through them. we went through every single question. I hardly ever do, I'll never kick a writer off a call before they're done, unless they're the type of writer I don't work with anymore, which is, the kind who, I don't know how to describe it, but there was a period where I had a bunch of red flag things happen in a row, and I just started to get a really good sense of what writers were going to be so high maintenance that we just weren't a good fit. Because that's more of a counseling thing. Nothing wrong with it. Yeah, so the call is, I leave it up to them. I try and make it safe, a safe environment for them. I tell them as soon as we sit down, I tell them how much I like their book. I hardly ever work on something I really don't like. So it's easy for me to do that. And it kind of breaks the ice in a positive way. And then we get into, depending on what type of person they are, we might just be staring at each other for a couple seconds, and then I'll kind of lead them through it a little bit more, like, well, I think we should talk about the book. Would you like to would you like to do any brainstorming around some of the revision suggestions I sent you, or are there some that won't work? It just depends on how what they're like. And if they come with a list of questions, I just say, let's go through your questions, stuff like that.
Thank you.
Oops. Any other questions?
Yeah, and I apologize if you mentioned this. I had to step away to tend to my dog for a minute, but
Oh yeah, no worries.
Single spaced or double spaced? I thought you said maybe single spaced on a prior call, but I don't trust my memory.
I do single space. Sometimes I'll do 1.15. Not for any particular reason. I tend to overwrite rather than underwrite, so my letters are always long enough. But sometimes I just don't like the way single space looks, and so I'll just change it. Yeah, so I do single space. There are editors who do double spaced letters, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. It's in terms of how you send it to me. You will kind of get a sense of what you want your own business documents to look like, and then you'll do templates for all of them so that you're prepared ahead of time to send out, like, quotes and stuff like that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, I like 1-inch margins, 12-point font, date, and your name. You guys have all been good about putting your name in the file name. So any other questions?
I actually do have one.
Yeah.
Curious, like, I think you said that you also do like sample edits, and I'm curious, do you give any kind of like editorial letter in that scenario?
I give a little bit of feedback. So my sample edits I send like sometimes 3 to 5 page memo, but it is not me writing about their novel for 3 to 5 pages, because that would be a lot of writing. It's got boilerplate text. Thanks so much for the opportunity to read some of your work. I always ask to see the whole manuscript now, because of an occasion when I ran into a situation where the manuscript was unfinished, and I didn't know until I got to 60,000 words in. I was like, oh, I think I mentioned that I had to, it turned into something else, which was fine. It was really fun. But so I asked to see the whole thing. So in the sample edit, I do something similar to the opening of my editorial letter, like to establish that I'm looking at what they sent me is, thanks for having me look at this. Here's, it's a novel in this genre, if there is a genre. It's this many words. When I do get the whole manuscript, I'll scroll through. I don't do word counts or stuff like that, but I will scroll through and just say how many chapters it has. I think it provides some context. And because you sometimes are competing with 5 other editors, I want them to be able to see that I come at things from almost from an aerial perspective, and then zoom in. And then I will have this section called Thoughts on a Manuscript. And I only read the first 10 pages. That's max for fiction. So in the 2 paragraphs, single spaced, I'll just talk about what I thought, what my perceptions were as a reader from reading the first 10 pages. You can tell a surprising amount about a novel by reading its opening. And so sometimes I'll have a little bit of boilerplate text about why it matters, how characters are introduced, just depending, and whether it worked in their case and stuff like that. And then the bulk of the letter is explaining, giving an editorial recommendation, saying, I think you need big picture feedback. I think you need, and here are the two levels, the two types of big picture feedback I offer. One is the dev edit, one is the manuscript evaluation. I say what the deliverables are, like what's included, and then I give a quote for each. And then sometimes I will also quote on an optional second pass line edit and copy edit, because if they're self-publishing, they're going to need that done anyway. And it's good for them to have all the information in one document from one editor and know that I provide those other levels too. And then I end with just saying something like, next steps would be, once you've had a chance to look at all your other sample edits, if you'd like to proceed, just let me know. And I'll write a draft, I'll draft a letter of agreement for your review, and then we'll go from here. Just kind of give a little summary. So it is far beefier than most sample edits. I'll tell you that right now. I know that because one writer I worked with sent me his other sample edits of his shortlisted editors. And honestly, they were terrible. They were extremely thin. I'm so judgy. They were okay, but they weren't developmental. Like one person was just obsessed with using the verb to be. And that's all he talked about in his manuscript comments on the first few pages, and kind of in his quote too. And the other one didn't, I think she only made a couple of comments in the manuscript, and then her letter was just an email, cover email. And so that's fine. You can do a lot of sample edits that way, but I think I spend sometimes an hour and a half on my sample edits, and I don't charge for that. And that's just me. I came from an industry, conferences where they'd have like a team of 5 people working on a proposal for a month, because it's worth a couple $1 million. So I didn't see it as a big deal, actually. And I knew I could, I think that was what got me all of my early clients, and a lot of because I have every year I get about, half my business is repeat, half to 2/3, and the other third is new. And I'm sure it's because of my sample edits. Maybe testimonials as well. Does that answer your question? That was a bit of a side trip into how awesome my sample edits are. Sorry about that. Woo! Okay, last lesson. How to write a strong one. This is just a tour. Because it's all in your packet. Every single thing. So I think that blocking your time, of course, I'm obsessed. I'd leave yourself a few hours if you have never written one. That's just for this novella, and that's for all of the steps. And it doesn't have to be good. So if you end up only having 2 hours to work on it, you still write something. In a novel, there's more plot lines, more revision and stuff. Just make it but this one, you don't have to worry about that too much. If you have to choose between being happy with it and sending it to me, choose to send it to me. I cannot stress that enough. And again, this is a hard deadline. Choose to send it to me at 8:59, 9:59 if you want to, but do not send it to me at 5 o'clock that afternoon. I don't have to say that. Okay. No, none of you did that. So I don't know why I got all it. What's the word? Passionate about it. Okay, so here's the 7 steps. Review your findings. I'm going to go through these individually. I do what I call pre-writing, takes the pressure off. Identify strengths and weaknesses. In my letters, I often call them what works and what needs work. You can, and you can just try it this way. Lots of people don't do it this way. It's worth a try. Open or create a template. What I do is I have it on my letterhead. I don't have all the headings sort of popped in there. I will think about the last novel I worked on that had similar issues to this one. I'll open that up, save as their editorial letter, and then change everything basically, but it just helps me not rewrite too much stuff. Another way to do it is you could have the kind of text, you can just expandable text expanders, something like that, where you could rewrite stuff and save it, and then pre-write stuff and save it and then pop it in. Or, there's a billion ways to do it. It's up to you. Okay, then, so I've got some pre-writing done. I've got my strengths and weaknesses. Usually the pre-writing I do, sometimes I take my comments, the comments extracted document, and do it that way. Move those around, use the really big developmental ones as something that I want to use as a building block for the letter. And then I start writing. I get it kind of as polished as I can, like in the general order, but I'm not going to hand it in yet, so I don't stress about that too much. I just find that putting it together is the main thing, and then you can fix it. And then I let it rest overnight, and then I revise, polish, and send. Have I ever gotten one done a week early? No, never, ever. I don't know why. I would love to. Okay. Reviewing your findings just means reading your stuff. Right now it's in a few places. You've got your manuscript comments, you've got the book map, and you might have a mind map or something, or you might have started jotting stuff down. So I would just read through that just to refresh your memory. Then pre-writing. I just, I start anywhere with that. I don't try and start at the beginning of the letter and pre-write my way to the end. I just write whatever is ready in my brain to be put down in some kind of words. And so I just hack it out. Sometimes I'll start the pre-writing as I'm reading through the comments in the book map. It doesn't hurt anybody, Sometimes I talk into a voice memo recorder when I'm walking to work. I know that's weird, but those are very big picture thoughts because I'm thinking about the novel as I'm walking. I can't write and walk at the same time. And so I'm not reading anything. I'm just having sometimes better insights than I would when I'm sitting at my desk. So it doesn't matter how you collect your thoughts. At this point, I will also start thinking about the umbrella categories. Remember when I was talking about the book map last week? I had those, those bullet points. There was like 16 of them that, these are the different types of like character arc, blah, blah. I'll start thinking about that and which ones are the most salient for this manuscript. If I haven't already thought about that, I will really think about it then. And, which ones are the biggest picture and which ones can be kind of tucked under, like, I'm just thinking about some of the scenes in Destination Wedding. They felt like they weren't explored deeply enough. They weren't finished, like the scene in the lobby. Nobody asked, well, how come or Joe didn't ask, how do you guys know each other? Then it was like 2 scenes later. And when they started making out in the cabin, what an old fashioned term I'm using, when they became intimate, it just, it seemed a little choppy. I just had this flash in my brain. Did one of them lick the other one's face? I can't remember. Anyway, it just seemed like a very strangely put together scene. And so whether that kind of issue with scene dynamics can be tucked under an umbrella thing, like maybe those scenes are too far apart for that to work. But, it could have to do with character development, kind of like, or character arc. I think the issue maybe with both of those scenes was that Jo did not say what she was thinking, and actually for the reader, we don't even know what she was thinking, but it wasn't, she doesn't express herself. And so that could go under character arc. Anyway, so I started having thoughts like that. It's all kind of, amorphous at this point. This is also when I start I'll use Perfect It and extract comments. And if it's a big novel and I have lots of comments and a lot of them are developmental, sometimes I'll do that thing where I spend an hour on the Perfect It document, just tucking all the characterization comments up together under one thing. And then I can read through them and go, okay, this is what I need to write about character. So this is the stage when I do that at too. You'll find yourself with tons of material. I feel like you won't run out of things to think about. At this point, also, I will look at the book map. Well, I've already done it actually in step 1. And you're not censoring yourself, I'll put a lot of stuff in the letter and then sometimes I'll just take it out because I realize it's somewhere else. It's in the book map or it's too nitty gritty for the letter. It doesn't really matter. I'm a fast writer and I don't mind writing something and then taking it out later. It's not a big deal, but it depends on how you work. Sometimes I get so tense. If you feel tense about writing a letter, you're not alone. Sometimes I get tense enough to procrastinate. But the better idea is just to get into your template and see what you can fill in, change the date, write a little bit about who the characters are, what point of view it's from, or anything. So in the packet, you'll see a couple of options. In those 2 editorial letters, you can just steal stuff wholesale to get yourself the bones of your own editorial letter. I don't recommend taking this other person's editorial letter, we're like getting verbatim wording from that and then putting it in your ones you're going to send to real clients. But for the purposes of this, it's fine. Step 3. This is where I aim for the 2 or 3 strengths and the 2 or 3 weaknesses. I do strengths first, always, because just to get it over with, and also it's easier. Some novels, it's not that easy to find a strength. Most of the time, the big picture ones are either a strength or a weakness. So characterization, character development, character arc, you can talk about it whatever way it makes sense to you. So this is a very broad heading. It might actually need to be boiled down into something smaller. Character motivations was a heading under weaknesses in one of the editorial letters I just wrote, that I didn't understand anybody's motivation, which is a pretty big deal. There is other ways to do it. In the editorial letter, that's the other example in your packet, the editor did an analysis of the protagonist character and a couple of other characters, but didn't really make it a strength or a weakness. So plot, if that's working, I feel like it's interesting, I'll write a little analysis of that, say why I think it works. The structure is well designed, I'll say why I think it works. If it's a page turner, I'll say that, but I only ever pick 2 or 3 of these things. I don't talk about everything in one letter. Yeah, scenes are well constructed and there's good dialogue and conflict, and they start when they, at the last minute, and they end before they get boring. I'll talk about that and say scene dynamics work. If there's not a lot that works, but the basic concept is good, I'll say that. With a bit of analysis, to use up some page time. If the prose is really excellent, I'll say that that's a strength, especially if they're aiming for traditional publishing, because it matters there. Standards are very high, usually. When I say writing analysis, I mean writing 1 to 3 paragraphs, sometimes more, that refer specifically to this thing, like pacing or tension in the overall novel. I think that's enough coverage. Like that's enough page for stuff under what works. You don't have to go on and on and on, because it already works, and your comments in the manuscript will be good. You don't want it to be a sentence either, because that's not enough information. Okay. The examples of what needs work fall into the same basic categories as what works. Yeah. If you choose, as you choose which weaknesses to focus on in the letter, I would say think about what would have the most impact on the novel if it was done well, if it was revised well. So for Destination Wedding, if the story world was really vivid, it wouldn't have that much impact if the problems with character arc were not addressed. So I would, if there's like you can't picture some stuff, some scenes you can really picture, but I wouldn't necessarily say pick something like story world or setting, because it's not going to matter that much if the writer develops that and doesn't develop character transformation. So that's kind of can be a good way to hone in on the ones, what you're going to put under what needs work. And again, you might unpack the larger heading, like, structure, into something more manageable. So rather than saying characterization is weakness, you might say something more specific, like Joe's character arc needs work. Wouldn't be everyone's. The writer has your manuscript markup. So if you wrote an observation or an idea, say about Lily in the wedding scene, they don't need that in the letter too, because she's not a main character. So it's, it'll be somewhere. When I have these, sometimes I already know what I'm going to write. Like I know which headings I'm going to have even from the beginning of when I start reading the novel. And sometimes I'm still kind of confused as I write the letter. That's just normal for me. It'll always become clear. It'll always become clear enough for you to call it a good letter. And I think, there's some more stuff I could say, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on examples, because I feel like it's not really about Destination Wedding. I would say refer to your PDF of the slides and lecture, because I do have in that script, I have more examples about, what can be a weakness and how it might feel to you when it is a weakness. Like if I'm not connected to the characters, it might be because their motivations are unclear. So that could be helpful for you when you're writing the letter, to just read through the end of this, of this PDF that you're going to get. But the reason I don't feel right talking about it right now is that it's kind of general. And so we've only got like 5 minutes left, and I don't want to waste your time. Does it sound weird? I feel like I'm having an out-of-body experience. Don't worry. Yes, consider what has the most potential for impact. Just to go back to prose, I think I mentioned that sometimes I will do some line editing. I'll pick a 3-page section or a 2-page section and line edit the heck out of it. If I do something like that, I'll say and if I say prose is a weakness, like it's not publishable because your prose is not high enough quality, I will just say, take a look at the manuscript and see what you think about that section I line edited on pages, blah, blah. And I never say it that bluntly, of course, that, you're never going to get published because your prose needs too much work. But there's ways to refer to the other materials in the letter without making them a big category on their own. Okay, step 4. So you've read over your stuff. You've done some pre-writing. You can have a template or not for this course, but I highly recommend making one for real life. Eventually, it will have your business name or your name on it. I worked as Pat Dobie for years, and then I started Lucid Edit because I was using Pat Dobie for other stuff. Business name, addressed to the writer, and dated. So that's just business correspondence. When I'm doing the letter, I use Word's style function to make headers so I can jump around inside the letter when I'm writing it. Sometimes, especially when they're long, I want to move a paragraph that was under pacing up to plot or something. And so that makes it that easier to do. Okay, then I write the actual letter. This is how I always start with what works. Then I write about what needs work. I try to make actionable suggestions. I relate any general craft advice to aspects of their story. Before I put it away for the day, I revise for flow and try and just remove any obvious repetitions. And I insert clear transitions. So I use subheads, not all editors do. Sometimes it'll just be one long letter. So if you don't use subheads, then good transitions can really help the writer. I write a strong opening and closing. I just changed mine. I wrote a strong one 10 years ago and I still use it. It's the same one. Changed a few things. I check it against the book map and the manuscript markup, as in, am I saying this exact same thing in a comment on page 19 that I have as a paragraph in the editorial letter? If I am, I'll tweak the comment. I won't change the letter because I don't want to rethink everything. Yeah. And then I'll let it rest completely. Okay. I go back and consider context often before I write the publishing landscape section, because you don't have to write one for this course. You know, I'll still talk about it a little bit because we'll use it later. So if by context, I mean, which route are they taking to publication? And we're putting hybrid press under self-publishing for me. Publishing traditionally, they almost never hire an editor unless their manuscript has been rejected already. So the context will be informed by why it was rejected. They've been pitching the wrong agents, which just means their tastes don't align usually, or their pitch is really lackluster, can be another problem. Bad market timing has to do with publishers liking what already sells, but then there's too much of it and suddenly they don't want it anymore. So that's just a bummer, you know, for the writer. Poor execution is the one that you can help with. You can't help with the other two unless you do coaching for that kind of stuff. But poor execution, you can. You can take a badly written novel with a good premise and really help it by teaching the writer how to improve all the other elements of craft, especially prose. And this is where the strengths and weaknesses part of the editorial letter matters the most. You know, I'm always happy when the novel shows a good basic premise, plot, story engine, character arc, that kind of thing, because it's easier to help the writer make it good. It just will take them a long time if their prose is not working. Self-publishing writers have a different context. They probably haven't been rejected. They might not have been. Some go directly into self-publishing. Some used to work in traditional publishing and then started doing their own stuff. They might not have used beta readers, so their stuff might be rougher, and they might be unfamiliar with the nature of feedback, which is why I keep my tone respectful regardless of what avenue they're going. They might feel more urgency. They often don't know how long it takes to get stuff done. And so they might not realize that editors can book up 3-4 months in advance, and that if they want to work with you, they have to wait. So I always, when I do a sample edit, I always check if they're okay with waiting. If I have a booking, sometimes I'm ready the next month. They might ask for referrals to other suppliers. So if you have buddies in the publishing industry or people who work with self-publishing writers, it's really good to keep a little list you can send people. Okay, I let it rest. I just leave it alone. I might think about it, but I don't try to work on it. I'll go home. If I'm on a time crunch, I'll finish off the other deliverables. Like I'll format the book map. You know, I might tweak comments or just scroll through and make sure I didn't leave in any accidental insults. And then I open it up again the next day. I make any changes. I proofread it. I check, and I've done this before, so sometimes I don't do it because I've already done it. Make sure that they're not all reiterating the same stuff. I used to do the same stuff in every single thing. I'd have a thought in the manuscript. I'd write it out completely. I'd do a whole book map with that thought being tracked all the way through. And then I'd completely have that thought in the editorial letter as well. And it's just, I sounded demented, you know, so I stopped doing that. I send it by email, and I always ask them to acknowledge receipt because sometimes stuff goes to people's spam. And also I just say, take your time going through it and get in touch when you're ready to book the call. This can be helpful. Many editors are perfectionists. I screw up a lot. I almost always have a typo in my editorial letter because humans are by nature imperfect. And I don't know, there's a lot of editors with more experience than I have. There's a lot of editors with less. It doesn't matter. Your good enough is good enough. What I know is that I really love the work. I make a decent living working at it full time. And it's a gift to love your work, And I'm helping writers. Writers are my favorite people. Any questions? Doom, 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 doom. We're on the second to last week. So I'm just going to run through this. Key takeaways. Editorial letter is the primary vehicle for delivering your thoughts about the manuscript. Organize it with a logical flow between analysis, teaching, which is optional, and specific revision advice. And that you won't discover what the logical flow is until you write it. And even then, you might not get a good handle on it for this course. I wouldn't worry about it at all. Craft knowledge and the ability to write with clarity are integral to being a good developmental editor. Building that kind of knowledge is ongoing. Work smarter, not harder. I made that up. Just kidding. I didn't make that up. Use a template and springboard from your existing thoughts. You don't have to start over. Everything you've already been thinking as you've gone through the last couple of weeks is what'll go in the letter 9 times out of 10. You'll just figure out how to organize it and, get it together. I do think that, right. Yeah. No, I guess that's it. I thought I had another point. Okay, so there's just one assignment because you don't have a lot of time to do it. And again, it doesn't have to be fancy. If you don't want Angela to have your name, so here's what will happen. I have your manuscripts with the markup. If you haven't already got your memo, you'll get it right after class. So for the feedback on that, I just did a 1 or 2 page memo. I didn't, comment on each comment or anything like that. For the editorial letter feedback, I will just give marginal comments. So you won't get a memo. It'll just be my reactions as I read through your letter. And I read each letter twice. I spend a bit of time on them. And I don't often comment on, whether I think a suggestion is a really good idea for that particular novel. I'm mostly thinking about how you convey your ideas, whether I feel that, you've explained your rationale, that kind of stuff. Just write however you want to write. And I would throw out any ideas you have for revision because I think it's very exciting. Okay, where was I? Yeah, so I'll send those back to you. I'll get them Monday, and our last class is Tuesday. I'll get them Monday at 9. I'll try and get through them all on Monday, but I might end up sending them to you after class on Tuesday or even Wednesday morning. Rest assured that if you send it to me by the deadline, you will get feedback on it. For sure. And then I'll be on Slack. I'll talk about this more next week, but I'll be on Slack for a couple of weeks after. I'll have your manuscript markup. You can send me the book map if you want to, but you don't have to. And I'll have your editorial letter. I will send everything to Angela a couple to 3 weeks after the course ends. So if there's anything you wanted to change about your letter, and I won't send her the version with my comments on it, obviously. I don't know, just to reassure you. I'll send her the version you send me. So you get the version with me commenting, and she gets the version that's to her. If you don't want her to have your name, just don't put it on the letter, but put it in the file name, and I'll change it when I send everything to her. She won't come after you. Next week, hanging out your shingle. Advanced skills come with experience. The sooner you start working on manuscripts, the sooner you will start getting the experience you need. So we'll also talk about options for more training. Was it you, Catherine, who was talking about EFA? Yeah. I might ask you to repeat that at the next class if you don't mind. Professionalism. Oh, so next steps is just basically quite a detailed checklist. It'll be in your packet, but I'll run through it as a lesson. What to do if you're actually considering becoming a full-time developmental editor in 2023 or 24. Because it takes a little while to prepare all your stuff and you don't have to hang. I did it on the fly. I built the plane as I was flying it. You don't have to do it that way. Professionalism and systems. I will just talk about how systems have saved my bacon. And assess and integrate. That's sort of go around. That's like a sit rep. I'm curious, how did you feel about doing a developmental edit the way I do them? Did you like the work? Did you feel an affinity for it? You know, I've had sit reps at the end of the course where somebody has said, I'm glad I know how to do one, but I'm not going to do them because it wasn't for them. So that's it. Question? I just appreciate you guys so much. You've been angels of understanding and calm. Absolute. What's the word? Paragons. Oops. Okay. So I'll see you guys next week, and you'll get an email from me if you sent your stuff in on time, and you did. So you'll get an email from me if you haven't already. And then I know there's stuff on Slack, so I'll be on there. Okay. Goodbye. Take care.